All right, let's get some analysis now on what we are seeing in Cuba by speaking to Javier Farje. He's a Latin American affairs analyst. He's joining us from London. Mr. Farje, always good to speak with you, sir. So just tell us, what's your assessment of what we're seeing in Cuba right now? Are these protests going to grow?
Well, as Reed Lindsay explained from Havana, this started in a small town in Havana, San Antonio de los Baños, where people were complaining not only about the increase of COVID infections, but also the lack of vaccination, but also blackouts and shortages of food. That is spread, and it became more political. It wasn't a spontaneous situation. And we have to understand that in Cuba is suffering the consequences of COVID-19 because the last 2 weeks, the infections have increased. Now, in Matanzas, for example, one of the biggest provinces in Cuba, 90 kilometers east of Havana, they have 1,300 per 100,000 inhabitants infection, which has gone up in that's 2 weeks. That has increased the pressure on the government to start vaccination. Now, Cuba does not have access to Pfizer or AstraZeneca vaccines firstly because they cannot afford to buy it, and secondly because of the embargo, they cannot have access to these vaccines. So they have to rely on their own vaccines, which have been developed in Cuba. Now, we don't know whether this is going to be more political. Of course, it started as a focused protest on the issue of COVID and the issue of lack of vaccination, but also has a lot to do with the economic crisis which Cuba is going through, not only because of the vaccination, but because of the continuation of the embargo. We have to understand that Mr. Joe Biden, the President Biden, has continued the hardline policies that Donald Trump implemented in Cuba. He said that he won't go back to the Barack Obama era when they relaxed this embargo, and they relaxed this situation. So, on the other hand, and they have taken this very seriously. Díaz-canel, as he was explaining in Cuba, has gone out to say people have to come out and protest. But also, he went to San Antonio de los Baños, as you showed there. And it was very unusual for a Cuban leader to go and address directly the protesters, because he's aware that the situation is pretty serious. So they have an alternative. They have to increase the vaccination, but also the economic crisis is going to make things more difficult. Now, of course, there were shouts of freedom and shouts against what they call the dictatorship. It became very political, but the focus is on the COVID-19, the economic situation in Cuba, and how things have gone from bad to worse in the last 2 weeks, especially in the biggest provinces in Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, Javier, you mentioned there the effective US embargo, and I think it's worth reminding our viewers just how damaging that has been to the economy of Cuba for the past 50, 60 years. I don't think people quite appreciate the difficulties that islands face because of the US sanctions that have been placed on it for decades.
Absolutely, and that has made things worse because of the COVID-19. Cuba cannot buy certain vaccines because of the embargo. The U.S. sanctions companies that deal and trade with Cuba, first of all. Second, Joe Biden has said that they are going to continue the hardline policies because of his own local domestic policies in Florida, where they lost the election heavily. He wants to recover that electorate, and therefore he has continued the hardline policies that Donald Trump implemented during his government, which is not very good news for Cuba. At the same time, because of the economic crisis, they don't have access to hard currency. They cannot buy these vaccines abroad to such an extent that the international brigades of doctors would usually go to other countries to help have been used within Cuba to help with this situation. So the embargo is really, really damaging the economy. Attempts by the government to change the economy, to improve it, to make it more modern, to make it less centralized. But this embargo is making things more difficult, and COVID-19 has made things even worse than they were before. So yes, the embargo has a crucial role to play in this situation.
And finally then, Javier, it's probably worth remembering how moments in history come about like this. This is the first time that we've had Cuba that's ruled not by the Castros. This crisis has now come about. It does feel as if history is having a hand in this. And also the opening of the internet as well has allowed more information sharing on Cuba. So they're kind of facing, I don't like the term perfect storm, but it does feel a little bit like that right now. How's the government going to survive?
That has made the access to internet, the access to social media have made sort of the protest even wider because of that. Now, what the government is trying to do is trying to address the situation directly. Díaz-canel went to San Antonio de los Baños and talked to people where they expressed the situation. He expressed the reasons why the situation is bad. Secondly, they have to increase the vaccination, but also they have to put pressure on the U.S. so they can stop the harsh measures that Donald Trump implemented against Cuba. If that situation continues, it's going to be very difficult for the government to control it. Now, so far, Díaz-canel seems to have calmed things a bit down, but this cannot improve if the vaccination doesn't go up and if the infections don't go down. That's going to be crucial for, this is the biggest test for this new president who took over early this year. The biggest test after the post-Castro era. And he has to show now that he's willing to come with new policies, with new alternatives, different from the old era, from the old revolutionary era, and come up with more modern solutions for the problem. But the embargo is going to continue playing a very important role in the situation here. We don't know how the situation is going to develop, but so far, it's not looking good for the government. But at the same time, Díaz-canel seems to be trying to handle the situation personally. And that's a change from the era of the Castros, where they took a bit of a distant position in relation to what's going on there.
Yeah, certainly one to keep an eye on. Okay, Javier Farje, appreciate your analysis. Thank you for being with us.